In November 1956, the world changed in just 11 days. The most powerful empire on Earth was forced to back down. It was not defeated by bombs or bullets, it was broken by a single phone call. The United States delivered Britain a simple ultimatum: stop your invasion of Egypt immediately. If you refuse, we will sell every British pound we hold. We will block your emergency loans. We will watch your economy collapse. Within hours, the empire that once ruled a quarter of the globe surrendered, not to an enemy army, but to its own debt. That moment was the Suez Crisis. It marked the true end of British dominance. But here is what most history classes never explain. Britain did not collapse because of one crisis. It collapsed because of decades of denial and reckless choices. Those choices look disturbingly similar to the path America is walking today. By 2026, those similarities may no longer be theoretical. Once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. To understand Britain's fall, you must first understand its rise. During the 19th century, Britain controlled global trade. The British pound was not simply a currency, it was the currency. Nations used pounds to settle trade. Central banks stored pounds as reserves. International contracts were written in pounds. This gave Britain extraordinary power. They could print money and fund wars. They could borrow cheaply because investors trusted the pound. They could run trade deficits year after year because the world demanded their money. The system felt permanent. It felt unshakable. It should sound familiar. Yet beneath that strength, weakness was forming. By the late 1800s, the United States had surpassed Britain economically. American factories produced more goods. American innovation moved faster. Britain was no longer the largest economy, yet the pound stayed dominant. Why? Inertia. The global system was built around pounds. Switching to a new currency felt risky and inconvenient. So the world kept using Britain's money even as Britain's economic lead disappeared. Then came World War I. Britain borrowed staggering amounts to pay for the fight. By 1989, Britain was no longer the world's top creditor. It was deeply in debt, especially to the United States. Instead of adjusting to this new reality, British leaders chose denial. In 1925, they made a disastrous decision. They returned to the gold standard at the old pre-war exchange rate. They forced the pound to appear as strong as it once was. It was pride disguised as policy. To keep that exchange rate stable, interest rates stayed painfully high, growth slowed, unemployment rose. Meanwhile, the government continued spending as if the empire was still untouchable. Military bases remained worldwide. Borrowing increased every single year. The Great Depression exposed the cracks. Investors saw the math clearly. Britain was spending more than it earned. In 1931, Britain abandoned the gold standard. The pound lost nearly 30% of its value almost overnight. Yet even then, the pound survived as a reserve currency. Why? Because Britain forced its colonies to hold pounds. India, Australia, and many others had no choice. The empire itself propped up the currency. America has done something remarkably similar through the petrodollar system. Oil priced in dollars forces the world to hold American currency. But colonies eventually gain independence, and oil-producing nations eventually lose patience. After World War II, Britain borrowed even more. By 1945, its debt exceeded its entire annual economic output. The nation survived only because of American loans. Still, British leaders clung to the illusion of superpower status. They kept forces deployed worldwide. They spent money on prestige they could no longer afford. That illusion shattered in 1946, when Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal. Britain launched a military invasion. On the battlefield, Britain was winning, but financially it was cornered. President Dwight Eisenhower opposed the invasion. He threatened to dump American holdings of pounds onto the market. He blocked Britain's emergency loans. Britain's currency reserves were draining at more than £100 million per week. Within days, it faced economic disaster. Prime Minister Anthony Eden had no option. He ordered a ceasefire. The empire bowed not to an army, but to its creditor. The crisis lasted 11 days, but it exposed a truth that had been building for decades. Britain was a debtor nation, living on borrowed credibility. When confidence cracked, the empire collapsed.
Now, consider America today. Look at the numbers. History does not respond to pride, it responds to arithmetic. After World War II, Britain's debt to GDP exceeded 200%. America's ratio now approaches 120% and keeps climbing. We add trillions to the national debt in a single year. We borrow billions each day just to operate the government. Britain maintained a vast global military it could no longer afford. America spends more on defense than the next 9 countries combined. We operate hundreds of bases across 80 nations. We patrol the globe while paying with borrowed money. The most frightening part is how collapse unfolds. It happens slowly, then suddenly. For years, Britain's warning signs were obvious: rising debt, industrial decline, military overreach. But the pound looked strong. Leaders convinced themselves decline was impossible. Then one crisis arrived. In less than 2 weeks, a century of dominance ended. America could face its own moment. It might come from a debt ceiling standoff. It could come from a financial shock that shakes faith in treasury bonds. Confidence is fragile. Once broken, it is hard to restore. The Congressional Budget Office projects a terrifying milestone. By 2026, interest payments on our national debt will exceed $1 trillion annually. We may spend more on interest than on defense or Medicare. That is the financial position of a household so deep in debt that minimum payments consume the entire income. When a reserve currency weakens, ordinary people suffer. After the pound fell, British citizens saw savings shrink, imports became expensive, inflation eroded wages, living standards declined within a single generation.
If the dollar loses reserve status, Americans will feel it directly. Almost everything we consume is imported. Prices would rise sharply and fast. Mortgage rates, car loan rates, and credit card rates would all spike. The government would face painful choices between cutting essential services or raising massive taxes. The comfortable American lifestyle is not protected from economic gravity. Watch the signs carefully. Notice when foreign central banks reduce dollar reserves. Notice when countries trade outside the dollar system. Notice when debt payments overshadow essential services. These are signals, not noise. China and Russia are already trading in their own currencies. The BRICS nations are building alternative payment networks. Even longtime allies are diversifying. Britain's leaders believed history guaranteed their future. They thought reputation could replace reality. They assumed they were too important to fail. Every fallen empire believed the same. Spend more than you earn for long enough, and consequences arrive. Borrow instead of build, and strength fades. This is not about despair. It is about awareness. Britain ignored its warnings until they became unavoidable. We still have time to act differently, but that window narrows each year. The rhyme between Britain then and America now is striking. Rising debt, global military strain, faith in past glory, reluctance to adjust. The British Empire's final error was believing it was too large to fall. We are at the exact point where British Treasury officials once begged for change. They were ignored. They were called defeatists. The public wanted to believe Britain was still great.
So the borrowing continued until 1956 made ignorance impossible. The question before us is simple. Will we learn from history or repeat it? Will 2026 become our 1956? The math has already been written, and math does not negotiate. Time will answer. I will see you in the next one.